Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode, we're doing It Came From the Network. Topic of this It Came From the Network, we're finishing off the month of January, celebrating Hulk Hogan and Hulkamania with the event that pretty much started it all, at least according to WWE. From Peacock, we have Old School Season 13, Episode 1 from Madison Square Garden, January 23rd, 1984, basically 40 years ago this week, the night that WWE considers the beginning of Hulkamania. With that being said, if you haven't seen my videos before, I grade everything on a 1 to 5 scale. 1 is the worst, 5 is the best. Let's jump right in with the first match on the card. We get Jose Luis Rivera going up against Tony Garea, and this kind of reminded me a lot of right when I started watching wrestling. I started watching wrestling probably 2-3 months before this, maybe even 6 months before this. And these were guys I seen on my TV all the time. A lot of you younger people may remember Tony Garea as one of the people that would come out all the time and break up a fight, kind of like we would see with a Jamie Noble or other wrestlers that work in the back now. Tony Garea was one of those guys that was a great tag team wrestler in the 70s. This match really wasn't that good. It was long, it was boring, and I'm going to talk about that more at the end here. It overstayed its welcome in my opinion. Garea did pick up the win here. I'm giving this one a 2. Next up, we have the Invaders. And yes, that piece of garbage Invader number 1 that killed Bruiser Brody is on the show. I hate that I have to review something with him in there, but I have to be fair. I am going to consider this for the match it was. He's probably my most hated person in the history of wrestling, or right up there with one of them. The Invaders, they're going up against Mr. Fuji and Tiger Chung-Lee. This was another one, seeing Tiger Chung-Lee, a guy that I haven't thought about in probably 20 plus years, and seeing Fuji towards the end of his real in-ring run. It was neat seeing them. However, this match was garbage. This is probably the worst match on the card, and it's not just because I hate Invader number 1. It's because objectively it was boring, it was slow, it went to a time limit draw. There was nothing at all that I found redeeming about this match, other than maybe seeing Mr. Fuji still wrestle. And even with that, I can't say anything good about this really. I'm going to give this one a 1, and the only reason it gets a 1 and not even a 0 is because of Fuji. Other than that, this match was terrible. Next up, we get the Masked Superstar, who would later go on to be Demolition Axe, going up against Chief J Strongbow, a gimmick that's pretty problematic now, but worked for the time. I like this match slightly better than the last match and better than the first match, but again, it fell into a lot of the same problems. Strongbow, I don't think I've ever seen a good Jay Strongbow solo match. I may have seen good tag team matches with him, but I don't think I've ever seen a one-on-one match with Jay Strongbow that I've enjoyed. This match was boring, it was slow, again, like I said with everything else so far. The Masked Superstar picks up the win here. I'm giving this one a 2. Next up, we have Polish Power Ivan Putski going up against Sergeant Slaughter, and as you can see, we are in the era where people's ethnicity is part of their gimmick. This match, again, it was good. It was about the same level as the last one, the Superstar and Strongbow. However, again, it was slow, it was prodding. I did like the finish of this match. They were outside of the ring and the ref was counting, and Slaughter, who was a heel at the time, barely beat the count before Putski, so Putski got counted out, thus causing Sergeant Slaughter to win. I thought this again was another bad match. I hate to say it, but I'm giving it a 2 again. Next up, we have a backstage interview with Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff and Mean Gene Okerlund that leads us right into a match. For Mr. Wonderful, he's going up against Sal Balomo, which you may remember from the early years of ECW. He looked a lot different then. He wore Roman Gladiator stuff and was a big, hefty man like my size with a beard and lots of hair. This, he was a much younger, much more in shape guy. This was what they said as Paul Orndorff's Garden debut, so he probably wasn't in the WWE very long at this point. His manager at the time, Rowdy Roddy Piper, which is awesome. This was right after Starrcade 83. The Piper Valentine match, so he was healing up from those injuries, but WWE pretty much pounced on him and brought him in and wanted to use him. This is one of the things that really got me into watching wrestling. Piper managing Orndorff and Dr. D. David Schultz. Just the way Piper would talk is something that I wanted to watch. This was a glorified squash match, but to this point, this was the fastest paced. This was the best work match in my opinion. This was more indicative of the type of matches that we might see today than anything else on this card. Orndorff does pick up the win here. I'm giving this one a 3. After that, we go to the back with another interview with Mean Gene Okerlund. This time he has Classy Freddie Blassie and the Iron Sheik, and they're basically talking about they're about to beat Hulk Hogan, even though they believe they've been cheated because it should have been Bob Backlund, but Hulk Hogan is substituting for him. That leads us right into the reason for us watching this video and the reason why we've watched stuff highlighting Hulk Hogan's career all this month. The Iron Sheik defending the WWF World Heavyweight Championship against the immortal Hulk Hogan. And I will say I was a little bit disappointed here because they overdubbed Eye of the Tiger, which I know why they did it. They didn't want to spend money for that, with the Real American, which wasn't even a song at this time yet. Or if it was, I think the US Express was still using it, which I don't think they were quite there yet. I don't think they came till the end of '84. But anyway, this surprisingly was my favorite match of the show, and it's not just for the historical context. This was a good match. Hogan wrestled here more akin to his New Japan style than he would in his Hulkamania run here. The Sheik, for all you say about the Sheik having bad matches, he made Hogan look great here. This is a really fun match. As everybody already knows, Hulk Hogan picked up the win here. I'm giving this one a 3. I thought this was probably the best match of the night. After that, we're treated to a video that probably most of you seen out there in the world. We get Hulk Hogan in the back being interviewed by Mean Gene, where Andre the Giant comes in to celebrate and dump champagne on his head. Ivan Putski and Rocky Johnson come in as well. We've all seen this video, either just a part of Andre dumping the champagne on Hogan's head. That's been played a million times. Nice little thing, a nice foreshadowing, especially knowing that later on we would have the Hogan and Andre feud. And being as that this was the WWF in the early to mid 80s, that wasn't actually the last match of the card, even though it was the main event. We're treated to a match with Rene Goulet versus the second murderer on the show, or the second murderer that I know of. There could be more. The Superfly, Jimmy Snuka, allegedly. And Snuka was a guy I really loved as a kid, and it's kind of hard, much like Benoit, going back and watching those guys. I never liked the Invaders. I didn't care for them as a tag team, and by the time I got old enough to know what happened, I didn't care for them already, so it didn't change my opinion on them. Snuka, it did. Benoit, it did. Because these were guys I actually enjoyed. This was not a great match. This is probably, other than very, very late on in his career, this is the worst Snuka match from this era that I've seen. He had great matches at the time with Piper, with Morocco, with other wrestlers. This just wasn't good in my opinion. Snuka does pick up the win. I'm giving this one a 2. Giving a lot of 2s out this show. Then we're treated to Hulk Hogan celebrating with his parents backstage. I think he said their names were Don and Ruth, which they looked to be about 80 at the time. They must have had Hulk when they were late in their life. But yeah, it was a cool little thing. You don't get to see Hogan's parents that often, and it was cool getting to see that here. Last but not least, we end the show with a 6-man tag match. And before we get to the match, take a look at this picture here. I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about this, but does that look like a young Dwayne Johnson with his father Rocky coming out the back of the Madison Square Garden? I couldn't get a better picture than this screenshot. This was the best one I could find. And I think he looks a little bit tall for his age, because he would have been about 10 or 11 here. But from everything I've heard and what you may or may not believe of the young Rock, he was big for his age. So you tell me, do you think that looks like The Rock? I think so. I think it might be him, especially with the way he's kind of hugging his father, Rocky Johnson there. I digress. That leads us into our last match. We get Rocky Johnson and his Soul Patrol partner, Tony Atlas, the tag team champions at the time, teaming with Andre the Giant, going up against the Wild Samoans, Alpha, Sika, and for this they had a third Samoan, Saboo. And it's kind of cool seeing Saboo because you don't really think that Saboo went this far back, but he really did. And I love seeing the Wild Samoans. I love seeing Andre here. Blue Trunks Andre is the Andre that I was introduced to first, so I always have fond memories of him with the big afro and the blue trunks and being the baby face. Was this a great match? No. Was it a good nostalgia buzz? Yeah, because I like all 6 of the people involved. I thought this was a fun match. The win was kind of weird. You didn't really see the pin. I had to rewind it and watch it again because as Andre's pinning one of the Samoans, everybody else is fighting around him and you don't really see the pin. But for that, it was a fun match. It was enjoyable. I'm giving this one a 3. Overall, I think this suffers from everything of the era of WWE. The matches were slower. The matches were more boring in my opinion. Very prodding. Very much punch and kick fests. I thought the card was not that great, as you could tell by my ratings. I wouldn't recommend watching this unless you really want to watch some of these wrestlers again. And if you do, I would maybe fast forward to Hogan and the Chic just to see that for its historical significance. Getting to see Orndorff early on in his WWE runs, pretty cool. Seeing Andre, and probably his last bastion of being anything near a decent wrestler, seeing Slaughter as a heel. I mean, these are all good reasons to watch this, but overall, I think the quality of the matches does not hold up. If you put this up against the Mid-South Wrestling, CWA, Jim Crockett promotions of the time frame, those cards hold up way better and are way more interesting now than this was. With that being said, this is the era that drew me into watching pro wrestling, and this promotion specifically. So there had to be something at the time that made you jump in, which to me, it was the excitement, it was the presentation. But looking back at it now, overall this wasn't that great. Overall, I'm going to give the card a 2. I thought it was probably a great example of that era of WWF as it was, but not a great card in any stretch of the imagination. With that being said, if you made it here to the end, let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. If you made it to the end, give me an Eye of the Tiger in the comments since they ripped us off from hearing their great song. My name is George Coles, and you've been watching It Came From the Network.